If conditional sentences are divided into two parts, the main clause and the if clause, the position of both clauses can be swapped. There are some alternatives to if, and all of those only deal with the if clause. That means the part which is modified is only the if clause, while the main clause remains unchanged. The first alternative is as long as, provided that or providing that, and the last is on condition that. They are used to replace the word if in the if clause. What you have to do is to replace the conjunction if by using as long as, provided that or providing that, and on condition that. Look at this example. You can go out if you wear an overcoat. The conjunction if can be replaced by as long as, provided that or providing that, and on condition that. The second alternative to if is imagine, suppose that, or supposing. The conjunction if can be replaced by imagine, suppose that, or supposing when you want to ask a question using conditional. Here's an example. If you win a lottery, what will you do? The alternatives to if are imagine, suppose that, or supposing. Let's continue to the third alternative to if. In case of and the event of are also alternatives to if. However, they must be followed by a noun. Here's an example. If there is an explosion, fire brigades are standing by. Remember that what we modify is the if clause. Replace the word if with in case of, then pick the noun, an explosion, lastly copy the main clause. The result becomes in case of an explosion, fire brigades are standing by. Another alternative to if is whether or not. Whether or not focuses that something will happen in any case or condition. This conjunction emphasizes that a specific situation will continue no matter what happens. Now look at the example. Whether or not it rains, the show must go on. You can put the words or not right after the conjunction whether. Or you can also put them at the end of the clause. Just like this. Whether it rains or not, the show must go on. Unless can be used to replace the conjunction if only when the if clause is in negative form. If the if clause is in affirmative form, we cannot use unless. Here's an example. Victory won't come to her if she doesn't work hard. Look at the if clause. It is in negative form. If this criterion is not met, you cannot use unless. Let's change the if clause into unless. Copy the main clause first, then replace the conjunction if with unless. Then change the clause into affirmative. The verb doesn't work is the negative form of present simple. When we change it into affirmative, it becomes works. The result becomes victory won't come to her unless she works hard. But for is another alternative to if. But for is used to replace if clause, which means if it weren't for or if it hadn't been for. This means but for can only be used with the second or the third conditional. Look at this example. If it hadn't been for the support of the public, the president couldn't have survived the revolt. Now, let's change the if clause into but for. First, if it hadn't been for is changed into but for. Right after that, you can find the noun which is the support of the public. What you have to do next is simply copy the noun and paste it after the words but for. Then copy the main clause. The president couldn't have survived the revolt. Another alternative to if is inversion, or we call it without if. Inversion is actually a conditional sentence. However, we do not use any conjunction to replace the conjunction if. Instead, we use several new forms. For all the inversion patterns, what we modify is the if clause, but the main clause remains unchanged. The pattern is should, Subject, bare infinitive, subject, will, bare infinitive. Here is an example. If you wear an overcoat, you can go out. To change the if clause into inversion, simply use the pattern should, subject, bare infinitive. The result becomes should, then take the subject, you, then we use the bare infinitive, wear. Then copy the main clause. The result becomes should you wear an overcoat, you can go out. To modify the second conditional into inversion, we change the if clause into two forms, depends on the verb of the if clause. The first form is used when the verb of the if clause is not were, while the second form is used when the verb of the if clause is were. The first form is were, subject to infinitive. And remember, the main clause remains unchanged. The second form is were, subject, noun, or adjective, or adverb. The main clause here doesn't change either. Here is the example of the first form. If I won the lottery, I would buy this house. Look at the verb of the if clause. The verb is not were, but won. That's why we use the first pattern. Let's use the pattern. First, we use were. Then, take the subject, I. Then, the to infinitive of won is to win. Finally, copy the main clause. This is the result. Were I to win the lottery, I would buy this house. Now look at the example of the second form. If I were rich, I would buy this house. Pay attention to the verb of the if clause. The verb is were. As the verb is were, we use the second pattern. Let's use it. Were, then take the subject, I, then take the adjective, rich, and then copy the main clause. The result is, were I rich, I would buy this house. For the third conditional, the inversion pattern is had, subject, past participle, and then copy the main clause. Look at the example. If I had known, I would have worn something nicer. Let's use the pattern. Had, then take the subject, I, then the past participle, known. Then copy the main clause. The result becomes, had I known, I would have worn something nicer. The last alternative to if is otherwise. There are three conditional forms, so there are three forms of otherwise as well. To change the first conditional sentence using the conjunction otherwise, you have to check which clause is the main clause and which clause is the if clause. As we know, the clause we change is the if clause, not the main clause. To change the first conditional into otherwise, you have to use the following form. The form is subject, must, bare infinitive, otherwise, main clause. Look at the example. If she has time, she will visit me. The result of the sentence using conjunction otherwise is, she must have time, otherwise, she will not visit me. Pay attention to the main clause. It is changed into negative to suit the meaning. To change the if clause of the second conditional using otherwise, you have to change the if clause to fact. Then, use otherwise as the conjunction, and finally, use the main clause. Here is an example. If I were handsome, I would be a model. The second conditional is called the present conditional. It means the fact of the if clause is in present form. The fact of if I were handsome is I am not handsome. Then, use the conjunction otherwise, then copy the main clause, I would be a model. The result becomes, I'm not handsome, otherwise I would be a model. To change the if clause of the third conditional using otherwise is the same as the second conditional. You have to change the if clause to fact. Then, use otherwise as the conjunction. Finally, use the main clause. Here's an example. If I had not felt tired, I would have gone to her house. The third conditional is called the past conditional. It means the fact of the if clause is in the past form. The fact of if I had not felt tired is I felt tired. Then, use the conjunction otherwise. Finally, copy the main clause. I would have gone to her house. The result is I felt tired, otherwise I would have gone to her house.